Hey strangers, welcome to the Vale. You can call me Kay. No projects today. I do need to finish one before I go home, but right now I am making flan. For those of you who do not know, flan is a dish you get in a lot of South American countries. So as right now I'm making Puerto Rican flan. But it's very similar, but slightly different than Mexican flan or flan that you'd get in other places. They all have their own little twist on it. But I had a lovely, lovely lady give me her favorite recipe for Puerto Rican flan, and I love it. So I'm making it today. I'm also catching a flight in 2 days to go back to the States just for funsies to visit my family. So I'm making flan, and then I'm going to gift it to somebody, and they had better appreciate it. So here we are. Anyway, so we got this lovely sugar that I'm bringing to melt, and then I have this lovely mix. It's evaporated milk and sugar and vanilla and salt and eggs. There you go. But once the sugar is melted, that'll go on. Well, the sugar will go into the pans, and then that will go onto the sugar, and then they'll go into the oven. It's a whole fun thing. Anyway, I figured that I would make a video because I haven't in a hot minute. I did kind of go MIA because it's been a crazy minute, and mental health is a fun thing. It's a fun game to kind of balance. But I'm currently done with school. I'm taking a break from classes because I feel like I learn more when I'm teaching myself. I've already mentioned this before. I like to teach myself things, and I have a hard time learning things when I'm told, like, this is exactly what you have to learn and you can't learn anything outside of this. This is it. And I struggle with that. So you gotta stir the sugar or else it'll start to burn to the bottom. And let me tell you, it is not fun when it burns. I've only done it once, and it was a catastrophe. Anyway, so I like to teach myself things. And so next, I believe I'm going to try to learn how to do relief carving. Because of my job, I'm learning how to build pipe organs, and a part of the organ case is a lot of relief carving. And quite often people will kind of outsource that, but that's a skill that I would be really interested in learning. I've seen a lot of relief carvings as I've gone to different churches and things, and it's beautiful. And so that's a skill that I want to learn. If anyone has any tips or ideas for how I can get into that, a good place to start, good places to get tools, let me know. I have some coworkers who have some good advice for where I can start. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. It'll be fun. So there's that. So hopefully I should be able to dedicate a bit more time into learning the things that I want to learn and doing this channel so that I can kind of keep track of the things that I'm doing and the projects I'm working on. And it should be fun. But today, my dear strangers, I would like to ramble at you about the difference between sirens and mermaids, because this is something that bugs me. This is like one of my top pet peeves in media, is sirens versus mermaids. Okay, so the original mermaid myth started out in there was a fish god in Mesopotamia. In Syria, at one point, there was a goddess who would dive into water and she would turn into a fish. And that's kind of where the mermaid myth started. So mermaids, half fish people. According to sailors, a lot of the time it's a little bit skewed. Mermaids could be good luck or bad luck, depending on where you are, depending on the thing. Sirens are different. Sirens are half bird. They are from originally you see it in like the old Greek myths. If you read the Odyssey, they see this island of sirens, and the sirens are half bird. And the history behind this is actually super fascinating. This is one of my favorite Greek myths. So it all goes back to Persephone, right? So Persephone, or I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce all of these names. So if I'm pronouncing them wrong, I apologize. But I think it's Kore. That was her original name. Persephone's original name that she was known by, and she was the goddess of spring, right? And so she stayed with her mother topside, and the myth gets a little bit skewed on how she gets to the underworld, right? In some myths, she just wanders into the underworld, and it's like, I like this, I must stay. In others, Hades comes and kidnaps her. In still others, because Persephone's father was Zeus, Hades goes to Zeus and says, hey, I want to marry this girl. And Zeus is like, hey, I'm not against that, but Demeter be crazy, so I don't want any part of it. You do you. And so then Hades goes and kidnaps Persephone with Zeus's approval. It's a whole thing. It's like there's a lot of different versions of the myth because it was passed down through oral tradition. And so depending on where you were, you get a different set of the story. You can do it. I'm starting to clump. We're getting there. So anyway, in any case, Persephone ends up in the underworld. And in some stories you get where, oh, Hades tricked her into eating the pomegranates. And in some cases, it's she learned about the pomegranates and was like, I want to stay here. I don't want to go back to my mother. And so she eats the pomegranates and uses it as a loophole to get out of going back to her mother for all of time. So Demeter, her daughter, has disappeared and she's freaking out. Obviously she's freaking out. She held the entire world as ransom through winter. Like, that's how the story goes. Demeter has zero cares about anybody except herself and how she wants to. She's kind of a narcissist. Granted, with the stuff she went through with Zeus to have Persephone, Zeus is a terrible person. Terrible, terrible person. So it makes sense. She's got her own issues. I can't judge too harshly, but it's a whole thing. Anyway. So Demeter, she is searching high and low, trying to find Persephone. And so she sends the, what are they called? The nymphs. The nymphs, the forest nymphs, the flower nymphs, who were supposed to be looking after Persephone when she disappeared. She sends them to search the entire globe. And she says, do not come back until you find my daughter. And in the end, they've searched the entire world and they can't find her. And so they come back to Demeter and they say, we can't find her. She isn't anywhere. Like, we can't figure out where she's at. A total side note. The nymphs in this story are actually the daughters of one of the muses. The muse, oh gosh, what's her name? Is it Melpomene? No. I think it's Melpomene. I could be wrong. I'll double check that. I'll write it in the comments. It's fine. But they're the daughters of the muse of, originally she was the muse of song. And then along the roads, at some point, she turned into the muse of tragedy. Just, again, depending on the time period that you look at it, it'll be a different thing. So she changed over time. But muse of tragedy, which I think is really poetic. So she goes and she goes to the nymphs and she says, well, you're going to find my daughter one way or another. And so in some stories, it's a blessing. In most stories, it's a curse. And she curses them with bird wings and says, you are going to circle this globe until you find my daughter, or this curse will never be removed. And so she gives them wings. And so they fly. And in the end, obviously, they can't find her because Persephone is in the underworld. They aren't going to find her on the earth. And so they can't find her. And they say, well, instead of going back to Demeter, we're going to chill out on this island here because I don't want any part of that craziness. And so they become the Sirens. These daughters of the muse of song become the Sirens, who have the power to show people what they want the most through song. And they're half bird because Demeter cursed them because they lost her daughter. So there's the thing. That is where Sirens came from. Sirens are half bird. And so it bugs me to no end that the media has turned sirens and mermaids into the same thing because they're different. There's a critical difference in their history. And so mermaids, you have these half fish people, and yes, the myths are different. There are good mermaids and bad mermaids, and sometimes they're good luck, sometimes they're bad luck. But the singing to show people their greatest desires is from the daughters of the muse of song who were cursed by Demeter. They are half bird. I'm really picky about it. It's in a lot of languages, actually, the word for sirens and mermaids kind of got mixed together because there was a confusion about which was which for whatever reason. And so that's part of why the confusion continued, was because the terms are very similar in some Latin-based languages. And that kind of threw everyone for a loop. But there you go. Now you know. Now you can be really snooty like me and be like, well, actually, that's not a siren. It needs feathers for that. But I'm a snob. It's fine. I really love the history. I love that story. Because obviously after that, Demeter holds the world hostage. Hades comes and says, well, I have your daughter, actually. And Persephone is like, well, I'm going to stay for at least half the year because I actually like it down here. And her name switches to Persephone, and she becomes the goddess of the underworld, as well as the goddess of spring, which I think is, again, very poetic. Because Persephone as a whole, like, spring is kind of wild. And it's full of just, like, it's really raw. If you think about it, spring is kind of metal. Like, it's the world coming back to life after being dead. Like, it's great. I love it. And so Persephone becomes, like, the goddess, the queen of the underworld, in addition to being the goddess of spring. And that's pretty fantastic. And so when she comes back from the underworld, the world comes back from the underworld. It's great. Greek mythology. Fam, it's wild. So there you go. I have very strong opinions on that, just because the story is so fabulous. The story is so fabulous, and no one knows about it because you say sirens, and they're like, yeah, the fish people. And I'm like, no. Incorrect, actually. But now you know. You're welcome. Other than that, let's see. What have I been up to? I have finished 2 baby blankets in the past week, as well as a shawl. And I am working on finishing 1 more blanket before I go home to visit my family. So it's been a hot mess of crochet projects, and there's been yarn everywhere, which has been absolutely lovely. And then it's been Christmas. I hope y'all had a lovely Christmas. And if you don't celebrate Christmas, I hope you had a lovely holidays for whatever you celebrate. That's wonderful. I did learn something very interesting about the history of Christmas, actually. Fun facts. Okay, so basically, Christianity, like, the people will go around and be like, well, the pagans started Christmas, and then Christianity stole it. When in actuality, the Christians were celebrating the birth of Christ at this time of the year, and then one of the Roman emperors changed, like, one of the pagan holidays to be on the same day in an effort to kind of, like, wipe out that tradition from the Christians, because, you know, there was a lot of butting heads there. So, there are a lot of different versions on how it goes, but they just celebrated the same, like, they all celebrated holidays at the same time of year. Then they ended up being on the same day. And whether that was them trying to steal from one another or just a fun coincidence, because, guys, it's right after the shortest day of the year. It's this time of complete darkness, and it's just normal. It's natural for humans to start looking to the things that give them light when it's so dark and cold outside. I get so up in arms about people who are like, well, Christmas isn't really a Christian holiday. Guys, yes, Christian. So, cultural appropriation. That's like one of the big things that they talk about, is like, well, the Christians appropriated Christmas. Cultural appropriation does not exist. And you can get as mad as you want at me for saying this, but it does not exist. We would not have any culture on the planet without cultural appropriation. We wouldn't have any modern languages without cultural appropriation, okay? There are so many dead languages that have turned into other languages. We wouldn't speak English or Spanish or French or German if it hadn't been changed from its original culture and melded with something else. And so when you look at holidays, there are holidays all over the world celebrating the return of light. Whether that be Christmas, celebrating the birth of Christ and the light of the world coming to the world, or you have Diwali in India, the festival of lights, where they're celebrating the path of light and light conquering darkness. And there's so many of these holidays, specifically around this time of the year, because it's dark and it's cold and people are looking for hope. And so, yes, I'm a Christian. I celebrate Christ and the birth of Christ and the light of the world. That is what that is to me. And I know that and I love that. But why in the world would we try and just crush other people's hope for light? I get so irritated by people getting mad about cultural appropriation when everything we wear and everything we say and the things that we do, everything is influenced by history and cultures coming together. And that's what it's all about. We're all learning from each other. We're all becoming better people, or trying to anyway. I'm trying to. Maybe some people aren't trying to. I'm trying to. It's such an important thing to look at the big picture and to see everything and not to see, well, that person wears braids. So this braids came from all over. Okay, I can go on a lot of rants about this. Basically, cultural appropriation doesn't exist. It's just culture. Culture gets adopted by other people. It expands and it evolves as time goes on. And that's what it's supposed to do. Like, the whole story that I said at the beginning of this, Sirens to Mermaids, it's culture. It's culture changing. It's people misinterpreting and going through things. And yes, I get a little irritated when people don't understand the history. But at the same time, culture did that. I don't know why it did that. I don't know why in someone's brain it was like, the siren half bird people are obviously the half fish people. It's the same thing. And I don't know why that happened. But that's really fascinating. It's really interesting. And while I really love the one story more than I love the other one, that's just me. You know, like, there's so many ways to see the world and so many ways to live. And I think trying to separate those and creating boxes and saying you cannot leave these boxes because you were in the box to begin with, you can't leave them, is a terrible way to look at it. I was talking with a friend the other day about the dangers of creating a them, like an us and a them. Because as soon as someone is in a group of them, as soon as there's a them, they're not people anymore. They're objects. There's a fantastic book. Oh gosh, what's it called? It's like The Way of Peace or Search for Peace, or again, I'll find it. I'll write it in the comments. But it's about finding peace within yourself. Because in this world, so many people will focus on themselves. And when they look at other people, they'll see objects and not human beings. And that is the danger of creating a them, is seeing an object. They're a them now. They aren't a person. They're a them. And so when you put these boxes on people and you say, well, that person's white, so they shouldn't have cornrows. Or that person is whatever they are, so they can't eat this kind of food or make this kind of food because they're in this box, because they are them. And that is such a dangerous thing. That, A, it kills culture. It makes it so that nobody can progress and no one's going anywhere. And B, it creates more conflict. Like, it's so much easier to say we're all living our lives. It would be so easy for someone to look at this video and say, she's making Puerto Rican flan. Like, she's so white. She's not allowed to do that. Cultural appropriation. I got this recipe from a Puerto Rican lady. She's a really good friend. I'm semi-fluent in Spanish. I'm an 8th Mexican. I love this food, and I wanted to learn how to make it, so she gave me her recipe, and I am eternally grateful for that. So why in the world would someone get mad at me for making flan? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to get so offended about things like that. Sorry, I got a bit political there. It started out like kind of lighthearted, Sirens and Mermaids, but I think it applies. I should be less judgmental for people not knowing history, but also we should all be a little bit more involved in our history, doomed to repeat it and all that jazz. But, we're all working on it. I'm working on not being a snob. But I think I'm funny. You might not think I'm funny, but no one watches these videos anyway. This is my letter to the abyss, so it's all good. Anyway, I hope you're all doing lovely. I'll probably post a picture on my Insta. I do have an Insta. Same thing. I think it's just Darksome Veil on Instagram. So, I mean, you can follow me if you want more random pictures and all of the songs I sing to myself while I walk. That's the thing. Or follow me on here and get more rambling rants about nothing in particular. You're welcome to. If I offended you, I apologize, but I'm not sorry for what I said. I'm living in truth where I know it is true, and that's where we're at. So I love you all, even those of you who hate me now, and I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye, strangers.